Welcome to everybody, and welcome again to this edition of the Cameroon Town Hall for Healthcare Professionals. We are really thrilled to have every one of you join us today. Looking forward to an exciting discussion on A Light in the Darkness, Therapies recently granted EUA for patients with COVID-19. So we're really thrilled to have each and every one of you. So welcome, and we're really looking forward to having a great exchange with you all. Say hello to my co-moderator, Elvis Dante. Would you want to say hello to the group?
Thank you, Brian. A big hello to everybody for tuning in and taking the rendezvous once again for us to be together this weekend. And it's really going to be an exciting session. Last week, we had Dr. Dita Ivo, who took us through the importance of screening for colorectal cancer. And we had very interesting insight on that conversation. And we want to once again thank him so much for taking time to be part of the Cameroon Town Hall for Healthcare Professionals. And Brian, I'm excited and I'm looking forward to this edition for today.
Awesome. And welcome to our chair as well, Dr. Fomakene. It's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for pioneering this initiative that has brought together so many healthcare professionals from across the globe.
Oh, thank you, Brian. And it's always a pleasure getting to meet all of you, and it's a pleasure having everyone here for us to share ideas and to learn from each other. So thank you.
Awesome.
And we do not have Alison today. Alison is still very busy and committed with some academic work. And as well, I think Viva and Luisa will be joining us soon. If not, I think it's Luisa already in the house. I think she will be joining us soon. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And before we start this session, I have some good news. And the good news is that today is the birthday of our own chairperson. Hey, happy birthday. He begged me not to make anything about this. And I said, I will not hold it. If I hold it, I'll have diabetes because it's so sweet, you know. I have to let it out there. And so, you know, there's no other way but to sing you a good happy birthday song on this day. As you know, you can put me. I want to see your faces, even if you're in the kitchen. Please, your faces, your camera. I mean, unmute yourself, and let's just do some happy birthday thing to our own chair, if you don't mind. I know this is gonna be some happy birthday song for you. So I think Ojong used to sing in the choir. Maybe he can give us a tune for this happy birthday. Ojong, you are my man. I will take you on our way anytime, any day. So
I thought you'd have called Dr. Atsu Ascensius, who's in the house and is the proven fire person.
If I sing better, go run.
Good. So let's sing a happy birthday song to Muno. Happy birthday to you.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy
birthday to you. You know,
I'm blushing. So
his birthday is such a birthday that you cannot forget. September 11. Who can forget September 11? You know, but I told Mono that, you know, you are such a kind heart. You're just a sweetheart, and anybody you come across, you impact his life in one way or the other. And I want you to continue to be that person. Please just type a shout out to Mono in the chat room to tell him what you think about him on his birthday. He's such a sweetheart, and I want us to acknowledge that he's a servant leader. He's a reason for which we are here, and so you deserve the best on your birthday. Great. So While you type him happy birthday messages on the message box, ladies and gentlemen, the Cameroon Town Hall for Healthcare Professionals, once again, for those who are tuning in for the first time, is the platform for healthcare professionals from Cameroon origin from across the globe. We come here every fortnight to discuss on health issues that impact the life of people back home and to see how we can share our experiences to better ameliorate the health situation of our people back home. So last week we were talking about colorectal cancer and how to prevent it through screening. And we heard a lot from our guest speaker, Dr. Dita Ivo, who told us that the age recommendation for screening has dropped to 45 for all men, irrespective of your race. And so we look forward to continue to sensitize our uncles and fathers and brothers back home who are within this age range to make sure that they can screen for colorectal cancer using whatever screening method that they have. We also heard that a guaiac test is better than nothing else. So once again, today we thought that we should come back to what brought us together in the first place, which is COVID-19. A lot has been happening. We are now hearing about, some advocacy for a booster dose, but of course, a lot of therapy has been granted emergency use authorization. And we were so much focused on vaccine that we almost forgot that therapeutics was a very important aspect of COVID-19 when nobody dreamed that there was going to be a vaccine. All focus was on which drug can treat COVID-19. And so we had all the different arguments here on which drug was helping or was therapeutic enough, and remdesivir and all those issues, ivermectin and all those things. But today, our untrusted authority who follows up every evolution as far as this pandemic is concerned is going to be our main guest, and that is our own chair, Dr. Muno. That is his own birthday gift to us, but to tell us more on the therapeutics as far as COVID-19 is concerned. And he wants to have a deep dive into all the drugs that have been granted emergency use authorization. What are they? What are their limitations? Their, effectiveness, and of course their availability in terms of those who are in the low and middle income countries as well as those who are in the developed countries. So Muno, we are so glad that you put together this presentation for us, and of course we look forward for an exciting session with you, hoping that we'll have more time to ask questions and get answers. But of course, he is just the presenter. Most of you have also knowledge and information that he might not have put together in this presentation. It's going to be an open conversation thereafter for us to exchange this knowledge. So he's not coming as a professor to teach, but he's just coming to lay, a baseline for conversation for us to have during this session. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and Muno, you can take it away from me.
Okay. Elvis, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure always. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
What happened? Did you stop sharing? Yes. But the name on the side screen is not you. Maybe you could just do a complete share of your screen, and then I'll pin you on the screen for presentation. Because I can see it's Erwan Duania.
Yeah, I'm seeing your. Yeah, we can see your screen. Hello to everybody.
Good, thank you, Duania. Muno? I'm sure he's having some technical hitches. Let's just hope that he's going to figure out. Muno, you stop sharing your screen. You are mute. Okay. You can unmute yourself.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes. Good.
All good. So I'm sorry about the technical issues there. I am extremely happy for the birthday wishes and for the birthday song Elvis, though I told you this had to be kept some kind of low steam, but you didn't accept to do that. Yeah. So concerning COVID-19, I'm really happy today that I've seen one of my colleagues here, Dr. Bogumar, and I'm so excited because she's really an authority in this. When I talk about an authority, one of my slides is really going to be talking about her. And the reason I want to say this is never think you're too small to change the world, and never think you're too small to change a pandemic. To me, this is one of the persons who has had one of the biggest impacts on this pandemic, but many people may not know about it. But when we started January, February, March, all her predictions were true. And if I don't say this, it becomes we're the few people who were seeing cases of COVID patients. And one of our own had predictions that today, she spoke about steroids when nobody was using it. She spoke about baricitinib like a pioneer when no one thought about it. Everyone in my hospital and the healthcare system where I working thought I was crazy. She spoke about tocilizumab. So there is value in us, even Cameroonians, when we move to the diaspora, even those who are back home, know your worth, and actually we can change the world. That's just one thing I want to share, and it's very important. Because when I take a look at all what we have gone through, I really see the value in that. So I just want to say we have been in this race together for quite a while. It looks like each time we're running towards the end line, then the anti-vax, also the anti-mask, and then the variants are popping up, and we are not getting a lot of people vaccinated. We do know that a lot of people are giving reasons not to get vaccinated, which is really sad. And we have to get to the point where we are putting in mandates for people to be able to really get vaccinated. There has been really nothing like this before in science, where we have seen that within a year of noticing that the COVID virus existed, we had a vaccine. And exactly today makes exactly 9 months since the vaccine actually had an EUA in the US. And we're starting to see situations where we are getting less efficacy of the vaccine, where it's difficult to interpret the data, what is really happening. We're still having COVID cases all over the world. The number of cases are not, they are decreasing, but there are still cases that are happening day in, day out. We have vaccinated about 1.5 billion people, meaning that we can talk about all the side effects that we have seen concerning the vaccines. And today I'm going to talk a lot more about therapeutics. Now, we do know that we still have a lot of cases occurring. If someone had told me we're going to be talking about almost 250 million people getting infected with COVID, I would not have accepted. And we've had more than 4.5 million deaths already. So this looks like a scary movie, but it's really happening. But we have come a long way. We have vaccines, and there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy going on around now. On the other hand, back in Cameroon, the data, the update on the data is not really very accurate, but we are starting to see a third wave, and we're hoping that we really get ourselves on top of that. We do have 3 vaccines that are available in Cameroon, 4 in some cases, or even 5, because there is the Sputnik, which is also available, and there's the Astra, there is the Pfizer, which is available for some people in special embassies. But we do have AstraZeneca, the Sinopharm, and the Johnson & Johnson, which is available. Now in Cameroon, the problem is not even about availability. The problem is more about people not wanting to take this vaccine, which we have. So here is data from the Northwest region showing that we are having new cases that are popping out. And we really don't want to end up being like India or the US, where we'll start to see more cases. With the Delta variant being more transmissible, we may get ourselves to a point where we start having more cases. We have been helped by our demographic. We have also been helped by our level of poverty, because movements within in a state where I stay, like New York, more than 1 million people transit into New York. So you can see how the dynamic of the virus is going to move faster than in countries where transportation is really very few. South Africa, on the other hand, is having the highest number of cases in Africa. You can also see that the index of development actually determines the number of cases that we are seeing, especially like in a situation like South Africa. The US is still championing the world with number of cases. We are now at almost 41.5 million cases. So as I said earlier, a good job has been done already in the spheres of vaccination. We are having a lot of people who have received the vaccine. Some countries are lagging back. The US has a different problem. We have vaccines, almost 1 billion doses available, and people are hesitant to take them right now. Vaccine diplomacy is helping a bit. And we do have, a lot of countries have had access at least to some form of vaccine, but there is still a problem in the underdeveloped world and in Africa. And we do have some countries have excess amount of vaccines, and all the vaccines are not equal. I know we talked about, Dr. Kenji talked about this the other time, the variants, what do they mean? And we could get into some questions about this. We do know that there are several variants coming in, variants of concerns coming in every day. We know about the most important in the media is the Delta right now. There is also the Mu that is also talked about every single day. Everyone is talking about new variants. So important that we do know that there is Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, there is the Epsilon, there's the Zeta. These are all Greek alphabets that we're using. Now there is the Mu, which is out. I know we really want to avoid a situation where the media actually, rather than talking about variants, is scaring everyone out and freaking everyone out. We just need to encourage people to get vaccinated. The problem with the Delta is actually the problem with this R0, which is more infectious compared to the original strain that we had of the Wuhan virus, which you see here, which was like 2 to 2.6. Here we're dealing with 5 to 8. And you can see that it's slightly more virulent, but also far more infectious. That is why we're getting a pandemic at this stage. The dream in the future really is for us to get a vaccine that is going to be able to target all the variants, but I think we're still able to control this, and the escape is not really something that we are dealing with a lot. I know over the media, there has been a lot of neglect in talking about natural immunity does occur. There are people who have had this infection. There is something vaccination-induced immunity also occurs. There's hybrid immunity for those who have been vaccinated and who had natural infection before. And maybe the Delta is going to take us there faster because it's more infectious and a lot of people are getting the infection. Now, to talk about to those who are waiting for an FDA approval in order for them to get this vaccine, please, there's been an FDA approval going on with the Pfizer. The others are going to get an approval in different countries, and please, so go get your vaccines. This has been the main issue going on. What is really happening with Delta? Before I get to therapeutics, what is happening? So this is really a publication that was done in Israel showing us exactly that patients, we were getting more patients in the hospital who were getting infected, who were vaccinated. The question is the vaccine not working well? Is it time for us to give a booster dose? I think during the question and answer sessions, we'll be able to talk about this. But Israel went ahead and they have given a booster dose to their elderly patients and even to healthcare workers, anyone above 60 years, and they have seen a turnaround in the third wave. So the question is it time for us to actually get a third dose? That's still a question to answer. Are we using the right metrics to even measure the efficacy of these vaccines? Measuring antibodies, the body cannot keep producing the same antibodies. Your body actually is created the immune system in such a way when you get in contact with an antigen, you produce antibodies, but you produce memory cells. So measuring the titers of antibodies over time may not be the right way to really measure the efficacy of what is happening. So we do know that vaccinated people are less infectious. We're seeing data all over showing that vaccinated people also they don't get as sick and they don't get hospitalized and they don't die as much as those who are non-vaccinated. This data has been totally proven over and over and over and over. Though we're getting breakthrough infections, but we're seeing that these people are not dying. Here is data also showing us the level of breakthrough infections. Several countries that have carried out studies and the level of efficacy of some of these vaccines. The Mayo Clinic actually produced a very traumatizing kind of review where the Pfizer vaccine was not as efficacious as Moderna. The question is trying to understand this, and we are urging the CDC to analyze the data for breakthrough, and let's see the characteristics of those who are having breakthrough infections. Is it those who took the Pfizer? Is it those who took Johnson & Johnson? Is it those who took Moderna? So that we can be able to actually tailor our third dose to the particular group that is being, this is happening to. So is it the duration, which Pfizer was every 3 weeks? That's when they got their second dose. Is it the amount of messenger RNA that was used, which was less in Pfizer compared to Moderna? So those are all questions. Now, concerning the variants, there's been discussion about the mu, which is a new variant in the house, but you can see here that the mu transmissibility of the Delta actually overrides the immune evasions of the mu. The mu actually looks to be the vaccine looks to be less effective against the mu, but the mu is not taking over the pandemic. So it's important that we get to know these values, that those who are vaccinated are about 5 times less likely to be infected, and also about 10 times less likely to die or to be hospitalized from COVID. And just this is data showing us exactly that this pandemic is moving towards infecting children. Here is data in the US showing us really that states like Florida that are insisting on kids not wearing masks are getting more infections in the classrooms, and we're having more kids being infected. So there has been a lot of mixing studies. I just wanted to start with the first phase by giving an update. Mixing studies that have done, especially in the UK, where they have mixed AstraZeneca with the mRNA vaccines, and this can be done, especially those who are back in Africa. If you have a chance of getting these vaccines later on, you can look at these studies and go forward. We do know that the higher the level of vaccination, the higher the level of protection, and the less death we do have in different countries going forward. So at the beginning of this pandemic, we did talk about a lot of strategies in order to fight against COVID. We started, all of us, with lockdowns, and we realized that lockdown is not sustainable over time. Though some countries are still doing lockdowns like Australia and New Zealand, and it's getting a bit, the level of immunity in the community there is really very low. So they need to really do a lot in order to vaccinate their population, like they will keep having this pandemic circulating over a very long period of time. We did talk about testing, which is a method I advocate still strongly. And I think the US has not done a lot in testing. Europe has gone a bit further. Antigen tests are available in Europe more than in the US. I think we can also test children before they go to school. This can be cheap tests that can be made available. Vaccination has been the gold standard. I think vaccinologists and immunologists have done a wonderful job in getting us a vaccine. Now getting to herd immunity is going to be 2 strategies. Those who want to get infected and those who want to get vaccinated, I think is going to lead us to herd immunity. And from data I just saw today, looks like the Delta and the infectious rate in the US is actually having a turning around. So we're having a curve which is turning around. If you look at India, there was a high number of infection and the data still there was a time which the virus actually had its time and went down. So we're hoping for that time to reach and for the community to also get a certain level of herd immunity, which may help. I think we'll have discussions about this. Physical distancing is very difficult to practice. I am still a strong advocate of face masks. During the peak of this pandemic in the healthcare system where I work, before masks were made mandatory, we had about 20 residents who got infected in the first week of the pandemic. After putting on masks, we have roughly reached, for the past 2 years, physicians have hardly had up to 5 physicians who have been infected because of mask wearing, even before the use of vaccination. Now, today we'll talk a lot about therapeutics. I'm happy that I have others in the house who are going to be able to contribute into that. And I think therapeutics has been an area where we insisted on, but we have had very little innovation or very little effect occurring with therapeutics. Before talking about therapeutics, it's important to know the phases of the COVID infection, what really happens. So you do have a lot of asymptomatic patients, about 80% of those who get infected. Then we do have those who have mild disease, moderate, severe, and those who are critically sick, like about 6% of those who get infected get critically sick. Now, in order for you to be able to create a therapeutic for this drug, as my friend told me during the beginning of the pandemic, and she was very right, is you need to understand there are two phases. There's the viral phase and there's the inflammatory phase. So the viral phase, you do need antivirus. And so far, we have not had any potent antiviral, really. That's what I'm going to discuss. We do need antibody therapies, which we have had a lot of potent antibody therapies that prevent the virus from getting into the cells in the first place. Now, in the second phase of this disease, you need anti-inflammatories, which are drugs that are going to help calm the immune system down and be able to stop the immune system from killing itself. So during this time, at the beginning, we spoke about antivirus, immune modulators, we spoke about adjuvant drugs, convalescent plasma, immunoglobulins, and vaccination. This is a slide that I made before I think I had done this presentation. Now, among everything that was tried, what do we have? I'm going to go into the details of some of the studies, and I'll provide you with some of the slides later on for those who want to have it. So for antivirus, everything that was tested, hydroxychloroquine did not work. So antiretroviral treatments, antiprotease inhibitors did not work. Atovaquone did not work. So we do have some controversies happening. There is remdesivir, which reduced the length of stay in the hospital. I'm going to show you the studies from 15 to 10 days. There is ivermectin, which is a controversy in the US. If you are in the US, I'm not going to advise you to give ivermectin to anyone because we have more efficacious medications against COVID, which are not available in Cameroon or in the third world countries. And the studies between ivermectin, the meta-analysis, there are some which have shown that it's slightly efficacious, but there are a lot of more studies that have shown that there is no effect. And so it's not really a drug I would advocate for you to give if you are in any of the, in Europe or in the US. So it's not even FDA approved, and everyone advocates against the use of ivermectin. We'll talk about that. Now, other antivirals, I've listed some here. So there is this molnupiravir, which is still undergoing studies. There are some promising data on that. Now, when we talk about immune modulators, this is where we have had a success in, and most of the success has occurred in the inflammatory phase. There is Decadron, which is dexamethasone, which has an EUA, and we'll talk about the different studies here. There is interleukin-6, which is tocilizumab, and there is JAK2 inhibitors, baricitinib. So we do have that. The other ones have not shown any level of success. We also have other immune modulators that were tried. There is colchicine, which there was one study that showed that it could be advantageous, but the benefits were really very low, and it had to be given in the outpatient, but not yet FDA approved. We do have some antipsychiatric medications. Profoxamine, which is showing some advantage. There is a third phase clinical trial going on, and statins also help in patients who have cardiac issues. So for adjuvants, the sad story about adjuvants is that nothing really worked at the end of the day, panned out to work. Vitamin C did not work. Vitamin D did not work in patients who were already hospitalized. But there was a tendency that those who were vitamin D deficient had worse disease. So you could see crizanlizumab, which is a drug we use a lot in sickle cell patients. All of these drugs did not really work. So N-acetylcysteine, zinc, and the BCG and polio, MMR, all of this, the clinical trials have all been negative. So going into the presentation of COVID, I would just want to say that looking at the beginning, we were testing people who were coming into healthcare facilities, trying to see if they have a fever. I think just looking at this data here, you could see that was a poor marker of the symptoms of COVID, really. Rather than checking for headache or loss of smell, could have been more efficacious than trying to test people's temperature. So this is not really a good way of trying to see those who are infected with COVID. So if in the future, if there's a pandemic, you should think of other strategies just by looking at this. There are several things. You have systemic symptoms. You do have respiratory symptoms, all the respiratory symptoms you can think about, including pneumonias, dyspneas, those are all things you know. So going into looking at the natural history of how COVID actually evolves, we could see here that during the first few cases that occurred in China, they did a lot of good analysis, and we could see that 81% of cases of COVID had mild case of COVID. You didn't need any medication, while 14% of them had severe disease, which needed oxygen, and 6% of them got critical. So that's where we talk about the mortality occurs among these critical patients. And I just got data from Cameroon from a paper that was published by Professor Subwe and Jean-Claude Ban and Kate, who is usually here. You see that the same characteristics actually pans out in Cameroon the same way like you find it. But they had less severe disease, almost 88%. I think it's due to the demographics, as we talked about. We have a younger population. The median age of Cameroon is about 18 years. So that's one of the advantages Africa has in this pandemic. Now, we do have risk factors that increase the risk of progression of severe disease. So we know cancers, we know cardiovascular disease, but it's important for us to know that age is the single most important parameters that deals with how severe a patient is going to go. So there are other things like cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease. These are all patients, HIV patients, patients who are immune, depression, patients who are pregnant, sickle cell patients. I'm trying to highlight the ones we have a lot, those who are obese also. So we do know that these are factors that actually lead to risk of progression to severe disease. Now, going into therapeutics, there were several studies. This is just an old chart which I presented several times, trying to look at a summary of what is really taking place. We do have a lot of solid data on steroids. We do now have solid data on interleukin-6 inhibitors and JAK2 inhibitors in the settings, but we have the most solid data on monoclonal antibodies, which I'm going to talk about. So in the outpatient setting, meaning that patients who are not yet hospitalized, what do we have? Here in this setting, it's actually contraindicated to use remdesivir, it's contraindicated to use dexamethasone, which is Decadron. Those who are back home don't prescribe to patients who are symptomatic Decadron. Baricitinib is contraindicated. But here there is monoclonal antibodies, which right now, they are not available in most African countries. So there are three of them really, which are very important for us to know. There is the casirivimab. These drugs are, the first one actually is was done by Regeneron. That's the one Donald Trump had. The sotorovimab was just recently approved. That is the GlaxoSmithKline's drug. And you do have the Eli Lilly, which was the first drug, the BAM, that's how I call it, which was which had an EUA. And right now its EUA has been held. It was just recently released in some states in the US, but I'll give you reasons for that. While for severe disease, we have a lot of things in our toolbox. Remdesivir is one. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's a glorified placebo. You do have Decadron, dexamethasone. You do have baricitinib, which in the absence of baricitinib, you can use tofacitinib can be used, and you do have also tocilizumab, where in the absence, you can also use serolulimab. So these are all the drugs I'm going to talk about today. And I'm not really going to go into We can talk about the details during our chat for those who have questions. I just want everyone to be able to understand how this drugs work and what led to their approval and why we have them, so that showing you that science is actually solid. So for monoclonal antibodies, they are where the work is in patients who do not require oxygen, who have mild disease, and who are infected. There is now a new emergency use authorization for those who have come in contact with patients who have COVID and who meet the inclusion criteria to be able to get this monoclonal antibodies, which I'll talk to you guys about. The first thing I'm going to talk about is convalescent plasma. We used a lot of this during the peak of the pandemic in New York, but they were not very efficacious. And we do have high titer convalescent plasmas, which have shown some level of efficacy in severe patients, which you can still use that in some cases, in some situations. So there is an EUA actually, that's an emergency use authorization for high titer convalescent plasma. This is something that we can also do back home. It's not very complex, getting plasma from patients who have been sick. But the problem here is that it's not really very efficacious. So I don't want us to take one step ahead and 10 steps behind. Now, we do know that these are the emergency use authorizations. To me, these are one of the most efficacious tools that we have in our toolbox, which is the BAM, and which is the drug by Eli Lilly. We do have the casirivimab, which is a drug by Regeneron, and we have the new drug, which was just recently added into the toolbox, which is by GlaxoSmithKline, which are very important monoclonal antibodies, and we are using them right now. So there is data actually to use them for mild to moderate disease in high-risk populations, and the patients need to have had symptoms started less than 10 days, because these clinical trials, those are the patients that were included. But I kind of, in the real world practice, for patients who are really sick, who I feel could get sick, especially my cancer patients, I actually strongly advocate for them to get this drug because I've seen how efficacious they are. So there are some inclusion criteria for those who are in the US and in Europe, which if you want to think about how to include these patients and treat them, you need to have patients who are above 65, but patients who are below 65, those who are obese, those who are pregnant, those who have chronic kidney disease, diabetes, those who have immune suppression, cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, chronic lung disease, those who are sickle cell patients, those who have neurodegenerative disorders, and those who have medical-related technological dependence, those who are trached, those who have gastrostomy tube, those who are ventilated. These are all patients that you should think about. Don't forget that this does not include the whole list. Also think about my cancer patients, those with dementia, Down syndrome, HIV, who come into your practice, those with thalassemia. We can't list all, but it needs a physician to feel that you need this. And I truly advocate for this in all the patients that I really get, and I feel and I've seen how efficacious this can be. Majority of those who get this don't end up in the ICU, even when they are at risk population. So I have a case which I'm gonna just talk about here. It's just a simple case. You do have Lum, who is 29 years old woman, and who was treated for SARS-CoV after her husband began to experience symptoms. She initially developed a cough and headache 5 days ago and complained of worsening shortness of breath over the last day. Her saturation is normal, that is 96. She is 32 weeks pregnant with her second child. If you are in Cameroon today and you do have all these tools available, is Lum a candidate for therapy with monoclonal antibodies? So the question here really is, I think Lum is a candidate. Reason why is that Lum actually, her saturation is good. Also, she has had this disease less than 5 days. If she had had it for more than 10 days, then you would think about not giving her. If she was desaturating, you would think about not giving her. Though in my practice, I think this is a disservice some patients, which that's just based on practice. So these are clinical trials, which I'm not going to label you on, which were carried out in order to prove that monoclonal antibodies do work. They actually showed how efficacious the balm was in compared to those who got placebo. And they have very little side effects when you compare them with those who got placebo, meaning they got nothing, they got just some candy. So you see here that the side effects are tolerable. The reason why this medication is not used in hospital in patients who are severely sick is based on the ACTIV-3 trial, which showed that these medications did not help patients who were very sick and who were hospitalized in the ICU and who were ventilated. But I still believe that there is a group of patients, this is just not based on evidence, who are in the hospital, who need little amount of oxygen, not yet in the ICU, where we can salvage them with some of these monoclonal antibodies, but they are not having any FDA approval for that. So here is the two-drug combination that was also had clinical trials were done. I'm not going to bore you with this, but you can see that there was also almost a 10-fold reduction in infectiousness once you dealt with these patients in the outpatient. So all of this led to FDA approval. But as I told you in the beginning, the FDA approval has been withheld for this particular monoclonal antibody. Why? Because as soon as we started having the alpha and beta variants, we discovered that they were not as efficacious. But now every variant in the US has been replaced by the Delta. So I think we need more studies to see if this, but presently there is an FDA approved, there is an EUA for certain states depending on the different variants that they have. Now, we do know that monoclonal antibodies do prevent just the virus from entering into the cell. That is really how they work. So that's the most important thing for us to know. Now we have data showing us really that there is resistance that is occurring. And due to this resistance, in every state in the US where the resistance is above 5%, then this particular combination is not approved. I know a lot of you I come back to this just to explain that we still go back to the different variants and what they mean. Kenji spoke about this 1 month ago exactly, and we really had a discussion about variants and scariants and the mu and everything. Now, this is the Regeneron. This is what Donald Trump got. It has been very efficacious. This is the clinical trial, the first one to phase 3 clinical trial that initially led to the approval of this drug. And you could see that there was actually almost an 80% reduction in patients that got, preventing patients from getting severe disease. So in terms of side effects, there are very few side effects also that were noted for patients getting this. That's why we're doing this now also in the outpatient and sending patients home. And other further clinical trials have actually justified the level of efficacy of this drug. So here we do have the last drug that was just recent, monoclonal antibody, the sotrovimab, which was actually was granted an EUA, which is one of the drugs we have been giving also in my hospital. There is actually an 85% reduction in infectiousness among the groups that are giving these drugs. So there is just something new also, post-exposure prophylaxis, which we have had new FDA approval, not FDA approval, but AUE, that has been given emergency use authorizations that we give to patients who are high risk and who have come in contact with patients who have been infected. So this is very important information for those who are in the diaspora, so that if you get in contact with patients who are infected, you know that, and you are an elderly patient or you have one of these risk factors, know that you're a candidate for this and the US government is paying for this in the US. So these are post-exposure prophylaxis phase 3 trial. That's the COVID-2069 trial that showed in nursing homes that patients post-exposure prophylaxis reduced drastically the rate of people becoming infectious and also the rate of people becoming severely sick. You can see the graphs by yourself. It was a drastic reduction of greater than even 80%. So this has actually led, these are all different studies showing you the different studies actually. So it's so important that we talk about this. And presently, the recovery trial, which is one of the most important trial, and the solidarity trial are testing these drugs to see exactly how they work. But we know that the reduction is in the 70s to 80%. And that is why I advocate, why do we talk about ivermectin when we have things, drugs like this that can prevent patients from getting severely sick? So that is why if you're in the third world, in the first world countries, in developed countries, the ivermectin debate doesn't even hold because we do have tools that are very efficacious. So now this is just for those who are in my area. This is just one of the slides showing you the reason why BAM in the first place was, its EUA was held because of its resistance that you see with the different variants that are popping out. And now we're going to talk about hospital in management. So for outpatient management, those are the tools we have. Now back in Cameroon, what are the tools we have? We don't have monoclonal antibodies. That is where the debate for ivermectin could go on. That is where the debate for colchicine can go on. That is where those debates for those drugs that could have some impact can take place, and where we need to still know that prevention is better than cure. Now, going into the inpatient department, as we said, remdesivir has an emergency use authorization in the US, but in Europe it's not used. And it's very specific for the particular patients that are supposed to get it. While glucocorticoids, especially dexamethasone, has an emergency use authorization all over the world. It's a cheap drug, it's available, it's accessible, but do not give it to patients who do not need oxygen. Baricitinib, on the other hand, is also one of those drugs which I'm excited about all the time, and tocilizumab. And the problem is, where do we give them? So the first is the adaptive COVID-19 clinical trial, which showed the effect of, you do have remdesivir. Here, this trial has not been replicated. So it's one of those trials that the effect of remdesivir has been in reduction. The benefit is in early disease, in those who are in the hospital, and it should be given for 5 days. 30% reduction in mortality. That was not statistically significant, but there was reduction in the length of stay in the hospital, where in a place like the US, where a day in the hospital is about $2,000 to $10,000, depending on where you are, this could be very cost effective. Here is just a subgroup analysis that I'm not going to waste your time on, but this is important for those who are prescribing this medication to know when to prescribe it, to know that you need to take a look at the kidney function of your patient, and usually is given for 5 days. Now, the Solidarity clinical trial was one of the big trials organized by the WHO. Each time I talk about these drugs, I want to talk about this because this trial actually proved to us that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. It also showed us that remdesivir did not work. HIV medications that were used in the trials did not work. Interferon gamma did not work. So all of this were all negative trials we had, took us back to square one. Hydroxychloroquine actually caused more harm than good to the patients who participated in this trial. Now the recovery has been the most innovative of all the trials that was done in the UK, where from the recovery trial, we have had a series of medications. It's amazing how much medications have come out from the UK, showing us that they are very good scientists as usual. Dexamethasone came out from the recovery trial. Also, tocilizumab came out from the recovery trial after several trials had shown that it was not efficacious. And they are now testing monoclonal antibodies, and baricitinib has been added into the clinical trials in the recovery, which is still going on. So here is the dexamethasone results. One thing to keep at the end of this is that if someone needs oxygen and is in the hospital, start them on dexamethasone. If they do not need oxygen, then majority of them will die more than those who, if your patient doesn't need oxygen, do not give them dexamethasone. It means they are not in the cytokine storm phase of the disease. So give dexamethasone to those who need oxygen. So this trial led to dexamethasone. How is it given? 6 milligrams IV or PO for about maximum of 10 days. There is trials for the high dose steroids, using higher dose of steroids. I think it's not having an emergency use authorization is something we can discuss about. So we do have baricitinib. This is something we can talk about. The first trial for baricitinib was the ACT-2, which we have a panelist that knows a lot about this. And this trial actually also showed, as I told you, I wanted to talk about, I didn't know she was going to be in-house. Her influence in the COVID pandemic was extremely important in the sense that it actually provided preliminary data for several trials that took place in the US, including baricitinib, tocilizumab, also including the use of steroids. So I'm truly grateful. And a lot of people may not know this, but you are a hero doctor. So now baricitinib, in addition to remdesivir, actually did a lot of good in patients who were hospitalized. And we did find a reduction in the length of stay from 18 to 10 days. There was also a tendency to reduce mortality. And there is new trials that just came out that show reduction in mortality in adding baricitinib to our standard of care, including steroids. So here is just a summary of the first study that came out on baricitinib. Here is the co-bari study that just came out and showing that patients who were in the ICU benefited from baricitinib given for 14 days. So these are the drugs and the trials that we have. And what was amazing was that those who got placebo had higher side effects than those who got baricitinib. Infectious disease doctors had been very worried about this drug, thinking it was going to lead to more infections, which it did not. So there is an emergency use authorization to either use baricitinib with remdesivir or to use it alone. So I'm going to talk about tocilizumab. That's the recovery trial that just showed us that toci also works. And it has an emergency use authorization in patients who are in the ICU, who are mechanically ventilated. You can get to use them. And this is just a summary of all what I've been talking about. So baricitinib, how is it given? We do give it 4 milligrams daily for 14 days. And you need to adjust the dose based on your kidney function. This is a drug you can actually purchase in Cameroon, though it's kind of expensive. So in the absence of baricitinib, you can use tofacitinib, which is similar to bari, but bari is actually the drug of choice. Tocilizumab can also be used in patients who are severely sick. If you give it the first dose and the patients do not do well, then 8 hours after you can give a second dose of toci. In the absence of tocilizumab, then you can use sarilumab. Now, our second case, I'm just going to go through this. I have some few minutes to end the talk. So Aza is a 47-year-old woman with a history of kidney transplant in 2014, type 2 diabetes, hypertension. She presented with 1 week history of fever, shortness of breath, loose stool, and decreased appetite. She denies chest tightness, and she also has orthopnea and productive cough. So her COVID test comes back positive. She's desaturating. She's needing oxygen. Her saturation is 85%. As her oxygen saturation continues to fall, and she's placed on high flow oxygen machine. So we do inflammatory markers, which is very important. These are the patients who benefit from baricitinib. Her LDH is high. Her C-reactive protein is high, and her D-dimer is high. How are you going to treat Aza? So the question here really is that you're going to give Aza, if you are in a place like this, or you're advocating for your parents or someone in the US, make sure they get baricitinib and Decadron. So as I said in summary, I'm still going to talk about this. Going back to hydroxychloroquine, these were all the trials that showed that hydroxychloroquine did not work, and let's put it to rest. These were trials for convalescent plasma that it did not really work. High titer convalescent plasma works. This is something Africa can actually use. It's not a rocket science technology to get convalescent plasma from those who are infected. These are trials from the interleukin-6. Tocilizumab has been mixed. Trials that showed that it worked. This is the recovery trial. And here is data also from the recovery trial. Here is data that showed that it actually did not work. Initially, these were trials that were done in the US. So it's important for us to know that zinc has also been tested, and vitamin C was also tested in clinical trials that showed no real benefit for giving our patients these drugs. In the outpatient, we still face a lot of problems. Monoclonal antibodies is what we have. My question really is, in Africa, what do we have? Right now, there is little or nothing that really works for preventing patients from getting severe disease back home. So if we can lay our hands on this, and if WHO can really advocate for these monoclonal antibodies to be available, that would be a step forward. And I think some countries in Africa are getting their hands on this, which is very important. And this is just a summary showing how they work. Ivermectin. So here is one of the meta-analysis that was done on ivermectin. This has been a big debate, and people are trying to shame people who are taking this drug. I don't think that's the right approach to do, to shame them. It's more of to educate them that being in the US, they have more efficacious ways of preventing themselves from getting severe COVID. The meta-analysis, there's actually a meta-analysis that shows that ivermectin is efficacious. There are other meta-analyses that show that it's not. And people have different experiences in the East Coast versus the West Coast about this medication. So this should be something I'm not going to advocate for you to use if you are here. Now, if you're back home, could be a discussion that we could have. So ivermectin, not recommended by the NIH, not recommended by any or by the IDSA, that's the Infectious Disease Society, waiting for better clinical data, not ready for use in the outpatient. Colchicine, on the other hand, is also one of those drugs that we did see some trials in Canada, but not included in the NIH and also not included in the Infectious Disease Society guidelines. Very modest benefit, not ready for prime time also. Fluvoxamine is very promising, actually. It's an antipsychiatric medication. I don't know the mechanism of action that this drug uses, but there is the Stop COVID trial, which we are still waiting for results. I don't know if those results are out. Now, vitamin D, we're very hopeful for this being the explanation why Blacks are sicker. This could still be the explanation, but supplementing vitamin D in the hospital did not show any benefit. So, but we need to make sure that the Blacks here get vitamin D, and vitamin D is so important in so many other things. So inhaled corticosteroids is something that I do advocate for our patients to get, even in the outpatient, because some of the clinical trials are positive, though it's not included in the standard of care. I told you about this new antiviral medication, which is undergoing clinical trial, which could be promising. And based on that, I think we have gone through all of this, and it's going to be time for discussion. And I just want to thank you all for listening to this kind of long and boring discussion. I think it's going to be time for question and answers, and I'm happy I have other experts who are here who will be able to answer some of these questions. So it's always been a pleasure, right, getting you guys through this long ride. So now we can talk. So I think the moderators have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mona. Really appreciate you for that really brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. And we're also very grateful to Dr. Bogoma for joining us on this call. It's really an amazing opportunity. Thank you so much. So much has been happening. It has been a really long COVID journey. I think we have essentially been building the plane as we've been flying it. So much to learn. We've been so many times humbled by the things that we have learned, the trials that have succeeded and trials that have failed. And I think it's been an immensely humbling experience throughout this pandemic. We'd like to open the floor to questions if there are any people in the hall who have any questions that they might want to ask. You can go ahead. Okay, I see. Yeah.
Ojan?
Thank you, Dr. Muno, for the great presentation. As usual, it was very didactic. I have a question, and I hope it doesn't come across as being conspirationist, because it's not the intention. But as a background to that question, I'll use a molecule which we use, which is magnesium sulfate. Some years ago, when we were trying to find a solution to preeclampsia and eclampsia, which was killing many women, especially in the West, many pregnant women, a trial was carried out in Zimbabwe, which actually proved that magnesium sulfate was efficacious in the management of preeclampsia and eclampsia. Once that trial was over, it was impossible to have magnesium sulfate in Zimbabwe because the pharmaceuticals considered it was so cheap that there was no need to produce it. So women kept on dying of preeclampsia and eclampsia in Africa, although it was on that ground that it was proven that that drug was efficacious. Now let's use that as a background to ivermectin. I don't know if ivermectin works or not, but I know that comparatively ivermectin is really cheap. What are the chances that big pharma are manipulating the data? That's what I want to know. Especially considering that in Africa right now, like you say, we really don't have much of a choice.
Okay. Yeah, Ojan, thank you for that question. And as I said, Bogoma is here and I really want to hear her talk. So as I said, looking at the data, I want to assure you that this is a global health problem. And WHO is purely engaged in this decision making. If that was the case, ivermectin is pretty cheap because it's subsidized by the West. It's not cheap because Africa is making ivermectin. And ivermectin is one of those drugs that we use a lot in veterinary medicine. That's how Americans are getting ivermectin, really, because they're getting it over the counter for veterinary medicine. We give it to horses, we give it to pigs because they have all of this worms infections that we do have. The question really here is that if it was an issue of the big pharma, they would have done same for Decadron. Dexamethasone is worth nothing. So this is really one of those reasons why I want to say, because when you look at dexamethasone is worth nothing, ivermectin is still not having prime time to me yet. It's one of those drugs that I said, it depends on where you are. Meaning that the argument in the US is going to be completely different from the argument in Africa when I look at the data. Because here in the US, I have medications, monoclonal antibodies that are free, that are efficacious in preventing you from getting severe disease 80% of the time. Why should you go take something which has not been proven that it works? Where the data that even proves that it works does not reduce mortality by even up to 10%, when there is something that reduces it by about almost 80%. Why should a rational person do that? Now, getting into our own environment where we are, which is back home where we don't have monoclonal antibodies, it's a call for us to get into clinical trials. Even if you're in Bamenda, you want to do this, get into clinical trials. Let's see if this really works. The doses, the clinical trials are out there. You can replicate them back in Boya, back in Bamenda, by trying to give us more data that at the end of the day, we're going to say if this works or not. there is big pharma influence, which I know exists, but we are dealing in a pandemic and there are a lot of people who are keeping their eyes and trying to make sure that big pharma is not getting into influencing anything like this. I don't want to give you my personal views about things like remdesivir. Anyone who knows me very well knows that I say remdesivir is a glorified placebo. But in a place like the US where length of stay in the hospital is so important, 5 days or 4 days difference in the hospital could be a difference in your pocket of almost about 30,000 US dollars. So this could be worth it in that kind of environment, but it's not FDA approved. It's not having an EUA in Europe. So you could see where the influences come in. But one thing I want to say about ivermectin is that, like we said about hydroxychloroquine, we are not saying it does not work. What we are saying is that we need more data at the moment, and it's risky for people to just go take it because they have come in contact with people who have COVID, and minimizing the effects. You know the effects of getting ivermectin when you're infested with worms. I think the infectious disease doctors in the house are going to tell us more. So it's really not a safe drug to take under certain circumstances. But if you want to, you're in Cameroon and you want to include it, if you're thinking like a public health specialist, this is going to be my time to distribute ivermectin in the population under the strategy of prevent, because that's what we do all the time for deworming, and give it to the right population and feel that if a pandemic is coming up, this could be a good public health using one stone, doing it the right way, but seeing if you're going to prevent COVID. Who knows? But I'm not going to go ahead and say I'm giving you for COVID, but I could still do that. Public health strategy, we are trying to even get ivermectin to prevent a lot of infections. I think that's the time for distributing ivermectin for onchocerciasis. Is that what we do, if I've not forgotten? So I don't really believe it's conspiracy theory, but you're totally right. There have been conspiracy things that have happened, and there have been really reasons for us to be skeptical about pharmaceutical, about big pharma. So, Dr. Boguma, do you have something to add, please?
I think I could have something to add to that question. First of all, a great presentation. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
I signed on because I knew it was your birthday, and I thought that it would be nice to come in and say hi. Back to Dr. Ojang's question. I agree with what you said in terms of the fact that it's hard to really think about ivermectin along the lines of a conspiracy theory where big pharma is preventing this drug that some people think might be efficacious against COVID to be used widely, because we are in a global pandemic, and that sort of barrier to getting this drug into the community would be harder to implement as when you compare it to the case of magnesium sulfate, that was something that was identified in Zimbabwe, and they could not use it for those reasons that you mentioned. It's a lot harder to do that when you're dealing with a global pandemic, which has infected 250 million people, is affecting every country on the planet, and has killed 5 billion people. And Muno brought up a very important point, which was the fact that we have dexamethasone, which is exceedingly cheap, has been off patent for several years, has a clear benefit in terms of mortality, and yet big pharma has not tried to block its use for the treatment of COVID. And that's really one of the first most accessible treatments that we had for COVID-19, which is now being used worldwide. So I really don't believe that there's a big pharma conspiracy theory behind ivermectin not taking off. Now, in terms of ivermectin and COVID-19, this is what my view is. When you look at the data, and there's been a lot of clinical trials that have been done, some of them with not very good designs, others with modestly good designs. And actually within the US right now, there are about 4 NIH-funded clinical trials which are still trying to answer the question through randomized control trials as to whether ivermectin has any role to play in COVID-19. The main trial that skewed a lot of the meta-analysis towards favorable outcomes in ivermectin was actually a study that was done in Egypt, which has since been demonstrated to be a study that was almost 100% fabricated. And the authors of that paper have actually retracted that study. And when you include that study in the meta-analysis, you realize that that study really skews the data towards showing benefit, but also it highlights the fact that in a pandemic where they're publishing hundreds of papers a day, we lose quality control, and you can have a paper that is fraudulent, really skew the debate. And even after the paper has been demonstrated to be fraudulent and retracted, the debate has already taken off in favor of pushing what was not based on actual good evidence. So I think it's important for people to know that a lot of those studies that were used as the studies to show, hey, ivermectin is great and is doing this miracle in Egypt, has actually been demonstrated to be studies that did not even happen, plagiarized studies and data sets that were fabricated and have since been retracted. Now, in terms of if we want to use it in our environment because it is what we have, I think it's also very important to caution the widespread use of ivermectin in a setting like Cameroon, West Central Africa, Central Africa, because we also have the circulation of loa-loa, which we know is a contraindication for ivermectin. Actually, there are levels of where you have to ascertain that there isn't circulating microfilarial levels of loa-loa in the community before you widely distribute ivermectin in that community. Because if you give it with the coexistence of loa-loa, you run the risk of creating a hypersensitivity reaction called the Mazotti reaction that can actually cause death. So it's not completely benign. That is why we keep insisting that if we are going to use these drugs in our communities, it's best to do it in the setting of clinical trials where we have monitoring, where there would be the possibility of ascertaining that we're not giving these medications to people who have existing contraindications to it, and where we'll be able to study whether they're actually beneficial in a randomized, controlled way to get the answers that actually provide us evidence to say, yay or nay, this is an intervention that we have to use in our setting. Now, in terms of where I would advocate for use of ivermectin in the US in the setting of COVID-19, there are unique populations in which I, as an infectious diseases doctor, would come and say, hey, this is a patient in which you should give 1 dose of ivermectin. And I'm talking specifically about patients who are coming from regions that are endemic for parasitic infections like strongyloides, who get COVID-19, get high-dose steroids to treat COVID-19, and as a result, run the risk of having a disseminated infection with strongyloides, which is life-threatening. In those patients, we give them a single dose of ivermectin to clear their parasitic infection, to make sure that they don't develop disseminated disease while we're treating their COVID-19 with steroids. And that has been implemented into protocols in South America to give people 1 dose of ivermectin when they come into the hospital with COVID-19, to make sure that when they get steroids, we don't develop additional issues. So there are clinical settings in which ivermectin plays a role. But for the treatment of COVID-19 as a daily drug, it has simply not been demonstrated to have any benefit whatsoever. I am a scientist. I'm open to changing my mind if the data support it, but I'm also a big proponent of studying things the right way. If you want to use ivermectin, use it in the context of a clinical trial so that we can have answers that actually advance the knowledge of how we manage COVID-19.
Thank you very much. As usual, always there, excellent response. So.
Great, so we turn back to the hall. Thank you so much, Dr. Bogoma, for your response, and thank you, Mono, for answering Ojong's question. We look forward to other questions in the hall.
Questions or contributions, please, it's open.
Please, I have a question. Hello?
Yes, Dr. Kate.
This is Nji, please.
Oh, Jay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm Nji Pantelius, currently following a postgraduate program at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp, Belgium. So I have a question. It's a little simple. It's about the treatment. So I've tried to follow like keenly from the start, because it's a very interesting topic that we are discussing. And then I listened through all the antivirals you mentioned, and then the dexamethasone, and also now ivermectin. I just want to get a quick summary. I know that the antivirals that you mentioned, you're mostly talking about severe disease. So if you just have a patient that is COVID positive, what recommendation could you give? The patient is probably not presenting with many symptoms yet, or it's not yet severe. What would you give? What could you recommend in summary? Because I've listened through and I've gotten a lot. So with your research so far, what could you preferably recommend, Doctor? Thank you.
Before Doctor come in, the next question I'll ask you to edify your question will be in which context or which setting?
Okay, so no worry, I'll summarize it in a brief.
Oh,
I'm going to summarize it very briefly for you. Okay? And I think if Boguma may have additional things to add. She's an infectious disease doctor. So summarily, what we do is if a patient comes in and the patient, or you're seeing a patient in the outpatient, or someone comes just for testing, regular testing, and they test positive for COVID, and they are symptomatic or have very little symptoms, and these patients are above 65 years old, and these patients have risk factors, characteristic risk factors that could lead them to develop severe disease, they become candidates to get monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
All the monoclonal antibodies I just listed out there. They are not a candidate. So this is now, let me go to this. So these are patients whom are in Europe or they are here in the US. They are not a candidate for dexamethasone. They are not a candidate for baricitinib. They are not a candidate for remdesivir because they do not need oxygen. Now, in Cameroon, what do we have in our toolbox? All what we have in our toolbox doesn't work for patients who are symptomatic, the research that we have right now. So these are patients you have to monitor closely. Make sure you get good nutrition, hygiene, make sure they put on a mask to stop infecting others. These are all barrier methods you're going to use for this particular patients. Azithromycin doesn't work. Hydroxychloroquine doesn't work in situations like this. Vitamin D doesn't work. But if you think they're vitamin D deficient, I'll give them vitamin D. Vitamin C doesn't work. Doxycycline doesn't work. I'm just going to list you all what I see people use to prescribe. Those things don't work. Now, if your patient comes into the hospital where you're there, somewhere in Boya or in Bamenda, and you see, you look at them, the patient is desaturating. I mean, this is a patient who needs oxygen, regular oxygen. From the moment where they need oxygen, they become a candidate to get steroids. What steroids do you get? The steroid of preference is Decadron, dexamethasone. It's cheap, it's available in Cameroon. Make sure you give them steroid. It's given at 6 milligrams per kilogram, okay? 6 milligrams, sorry, daily for 5 to 10 days. Maximum, it should be 10 days. And I'm open to corrections from the infectious disease doctors. Now, if these patients are in the US here, we're going to give them remdesivir in addition to dexamethasone. So if this patient starts requiring additional oxygen, meaning this patient starts needing what we call a non-rebreather, which it's providing an FiO2 of 100%. I realized during the COVID pandemic that a lot of us who trained in Cameroon did not really understand oxygen therapy, which is one of the things we'll talk about in the town hall. I think Dr. Brunhilde is going to talk about that. She's a critical care doctor. If you start needing high level of oxygen, meaning non-rebreather, getting to need a BiPAP, which we have now in Cameroon, or getting to need a high flow oxygen or getting to need any of those things, it's time to top up your game. It's time to add or to do your inflammatory markers and they are high, it's time to add baricitinib to what you're giving already. It's time because it works. Now, if these same patients are getting to the point where you're going to intubate them, before you want to do that, it could be time for you to give them a dose of tocilizumab. The question is, how do we balance these three medications? Do we give them all at once and all of that? That's going to be when you call your infectious disease doctor to sort out things for you. So these are the tools that we have at hand that we can use. In the absence of toci, you can use serelumab. In the absence of baricitinib, then you can use the alternative that I spoke about. Now there are other adjunct treatments that are involved, oxygen therapy. There are other things like patients who are on the floor, preventing clots by giving them some heparin for prevention of clot. It has been shown that heparin in patients who are moderately sick is beneficial, but not in severe patients who are in the ICU. That's data that we already have in place. And so there are other kinds of things like proning patients, the kind of ventilation you're going to do on these patients in the ICU. If you're going to use ECMO, those are all complex things that come to play, but we can always discuss that. But in terms of therapeutics, that is where I can end. I would hand over to Dr. Titanji. I think she's going to add some few things or throw light in some few points.
Okay, thank you.
I think that, I would want to focus on the Cameroonian context, because I think that that's where the challenge really is. And that's where, there might be a lot of utility in sort of some of these discussions. As Muna mentioned, when you're talking specifically about antivirals, before I even go into the absence of useful antivirals against COVID-19 so far in this pandemic, I think it's also important to reiterate what the disease course is. Muna showed a slide in which he showed you the different phases of the disease. It starts with a mild disease, which for most people, that is the presentation. So they would present with cough and flu-like symptoms, which generally will resolve within 5 days to 7 days, and they would not progress. The patients that we tend to see in hospital generally don't present into the hospital the moment they test positive for COVID-19. These are people who would present in the hospital usually 1 week to 10 days after their initial infection. And at that phase, that is actually the second phase of the disease, where what is driving the disease and driving their pathology is not so much the virus replicating, but it is rather the response of their immune system to the virus. And they're developing a hyperinflammation response and a cytokine storm that is driving the pathology. So COVID looks basically like two different diseases. Mild COVID is driven by viral replication, is mostly an upper respiratory infection. Severe, moderate COVID that gets you in the hospital is more of a hyperinflammation immune syndrome, which is why the treatments are different. Now, if you have a patient in Cameroon who comes in, has tested positive for COVID, they have mild symptoms, they have a cough, they have flu-like symptoms, but they're not requiring oxygen. We must not forget COVID-19 is caused by a virus. So the recommendation in that particular group of people with mild symptoms is you treat them like you would any other viral illness, which is supportive treatment, proper hydration, rest. And in COVID-19, we also know that helping to things that you can do at home to help improve breathing is you can prone yourself by sleeping on your belly like a baby. So actually telling the patients to lie on their stomachs when they do rest is a way of implementing individual proning to better recruit your airways so that your breathing is comfortable, and giving people guidance on things that would make them seek medical care and come into the hospital. What are those things? Increasing difficulty to breathe, and if they have access to a pulse oximeter, which normally some pharmacies will sell, they can check their oxygen saturation levels at home and know that if they're saturating at less than 92%, that would be an indication for them to seek medical care. So this patient who came in with mild disease then progresses and then starts feeling more short of breath, notices their oxygen saturation is now less than 92%. They rush to the hospital and they seek medical care. What can you do for them in the hospital setting in our context in a developing country like Cameroon? Muno clearly and rightly mentioned, right now, what is readily available in our setting is starting them on steroid therapy, providing oxygen support, and continuing to recommend proning, even in the hospital. We call it adult belly time. Actually deliberately asking the patients when they sleep, when they're not on their oxygen or non-rebreather, or even if they have their oxygen and they have their oxygen on and the BiPAP on, to sleep on their bellies, because that would recruit the airways and help them breathe better. That alongside with dexamethasone. If they continue to progress and their oxygen levels start increasing, despite their oxygen requirements continue to increase, despite them being on supportive oxygen, and they're moving from, say, for instance, just the regular nasal cannula to needing a non-rebreather, to needing a BiPAP, CPAP machine, then that is when you escalate to add additional immunomodulators. We don't have data right now supporting the addition of dexamethasone, tocilizumab, and baricitinib, and I do not recommend using 3 immunomodulators in one patient. If the patient is already on dexamethasone and you're thinking about adding a second immunomodulator, it's either an IL-6 inhibitor like tocilizumab or baricitinib, which is a Janus kinase inhibitor. The other thing that Muno did not mention, which I think is an important consideration in our environment, is even if you have access to tocilizumab in Cameroon, to administer tocilizumab, you do need central venous access. And it's not, in a lot of our hospitals, we are not trained to put in central lines. So that is not a drug you can give through a peripheral IV to begin with. Besides its cost, there's an additional barrier of how to safely deliver that drug in our setting if you're not in a tertiary hospital, which is where Janus kinase inhibitors like baricitinib and tofacitinib really can play an important role, because they are all oral agents. So, and you can find them in our own environment. So if you're thinking about escalating therapy by adding a second immunomodulator, then that would be where you would think about adding a baricitinib orally, 4 milligrams, on top of the dexamethasone that the patient is already receiving. If they continue to progress and they need mechanical ventilation, if they are in a setting where you can provide that, then they would get intubated and you would continue with your supportive care. But that is the sort of treatment algorithm that can be adapted to our settings. Now, in the US, in Europe, it's a completely different ballgame, because for one, the therapeutics are more readily available and they're heavily subsidized by the government. And I think that as practitioners, we have to continue to advocate that some of these therapies start to get to Cameroon. And I'll reiterate Muno's point about monoclonal antibodies, which are really, really important in that population of patients with comorbidities who may not be symptomatic yet when they have mild disease, but have underlying conditions that favor them progressing to severe disease. That particular patient population, they really benefit from monoclonal antibodies, which prevent them from progressing. And monoclonal antibodies are what they're in essence playing a role as an antiviral, because it is antibodies that are binding to the virus and preventing it from binding and infecting the cells. That's why they work early, before you get to that secondary phase of the disease where it's more of an inflammatory response.
Wow, thank you all very much for the answers.
Thank you very much. As we're happy always having you around. So
Yeah, Raisa, you want to ask your question or you want me to read it? Raisa says, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to ask about baricitinib. Is there any experience with this drug in patients on dialysis? Or is there a cutoff GFR below which we can administer it?
Yes, there is a cutoff GFR. Unfortunately, in the clinical trials that led to the initial approvals for this particular agent in individuals who were treated for rheumatoid arthritis, patients on dialysis were excluded. So it's not recommended for patients who are on dialysis. So if you have a patient who is on dialysis, really the immunomodulators that they can get would either be steroids or IL-6 inhibitors, which have been given safely in this population. You cannot use a Janus kinase inhibitor in this population. For individuals with chronic kidney disease, you can use it so far as they don't have a GFR that is less than 30. And in patients who have GFRs between 30 and 60, you reduce the dose from 4 milligrams to a dose of 2 milligrams daily. And another point that I want to highlight in terms of what I view as the advantage of baricitinib over tocilizumab and other immunomodulators is tocilizumab is given as an infusion. You can redose it once in patients who are not improving after the first dose, but it also hangs around in the system for up to a month or even 6 weeks after you infuse it. So the immunomodulation and the immunosuppression that it confers lasts even longer than the patient's disease. JAK inhibitors have, notably baricitinib, has a half-life of about 24 hours, which means that once the patient is better and off oxygen and ready for discharge, when you stop the medication, you essentially turn off the immunomodulation. And you're not discharging the patient with a suppressed immune system during a time which they are vulnerable to getting other bacterial infections and other things that may land them right back in hospital. So I like the fact that there are medications that you can quickly turn off when you no longer need to use, which is not something that we can very easily do with other immunomodulators like IL-6 inhibitors, notably tocilizumab and sarilumab.
Yeah. So the second part, do we have experience with it? Yes. I personally did have a lot of experience with this drug. And I can tell you from firsthand, I had a lot of discussion during the pandemic with Dr. Titanji. I felt from the day we started using this drug, it was an excellent drug to give to patients. And I know a lot of people are getting used to giving it. There was a lot of drawback in my hospital really from infectious disease doctors because they didn't understand the drug very well. But it's really one of those drugs that saved lives. A lot of people's lives got saved. And I had a pediatric case which I presented with one other Cameroonian. And we won the best, I think it was the best prize of a case presentation. We had to give Barry through to a child. And that day I kept Bogoma not sleeping to get me all the papers to justify giving that baricitinib to that child. And the child actually, we prevented the child from being intubated. The inflammatory markers were so amazing that they came down the next day, everything was going down and this child actually got discharged. So it was like, we won a best prize for a paper that we presented just on this child, but it's just one of those things. And it was early March, beginning of the pandemic, and no one could really understand. So we needed data to prove that we could even give baricitinib to children. And that's why the EUA actually includes children greater than 2 years. I think that's it, yeah, so.
Good. Dr. Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Mona, for the presentation, and happy birthday. I didn't know today was your birthday. You're going to send me your address. And thank you, Dr. Titanji, for all your comments. Really, I was just actually drinking them as if I was drinking water. So it's really unfortunate that we do not have much therapeutic arsenal, in our drawers in Cameroon for COVID-19. And as Mono, you rightly said that nearly all the drugs that we are still using up to date in Cameroon, clinical trials have shown that they do not work. And I feel that doctors still keep prescribing these drugs because that's all we have. And I'm just going to ask, but at least we've been able to show also in Cameroon through, I think we've got a clinical trial that's in preprint using Doxy from Yaoundé, also showing that it really does not work, although we're comparing it to hydroxychloroquine, which is what we had at the time. Really, in terms of questions, what's really the cost of baricitinib in terms of trying to get it to Cameroon, because that's going to be an issue. Secondly, I just want to make a comment around and a question around anticoagulants, because doctors still prescribe anticoagulants to patients in Cameroon. And just a comment with regards to that, we've noticed that patients who are admitted with severe COVID in Cameroon, when they are given heparin, they tend to bleed a lot. And when investigations were done, I think it was noticed that many of the patients who were bleeding were patients who had taken concoctions from Douala. I don't want to call names, concoctions from Douala, Yaoundé, there's so many other areas. So probably these concoctions that are advocated by many religious organizations tend to have anticoagulant properties, which I don't know if they are helping or not, although they have not been tested. And I think I had a comment around, I think I just have a third comment that has just gone off my head. Probably I'll come back to it. So, I mean, I want your thoughts around the price of baricitinib and the fact that we still see doctors prescribing Xarelto, for example.
And Muno, before you answer his question, just since you're on ground zero, would I be correct to say that one of the traditional or medicinal product has been approved by the Ministry of Public Health in Cameroon?
I know of one particular one. It seems there is a second one that has been approved, but I know of one particular one that is being given in Yaoundé, which is being advocated by one of the cardiologists. I think when I spoke to some of the people who are in the scientific committee, I don't know.
You can say that after.
Okay. Well, the thing is that really, where's the data? I don't know if Mono, you've seen the data. I don't know if anyone has seen the data. Before that approval, how can the Ministry of Health approve something for therapeutics in Cameroon without data? So, I mean, so you can understand, I don't want to go deep into it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, as we said in the beginning of this, and data should drive science. So we had an opportunity to do clinical trials, even when during the pandemic, and we did not. I know for Bishop Cleda's medication, I want to call it because that's what it is. You have opportunities to do clinical trials and we did not do them. And we don't have any data to prove exactly. We're practicing what they call sentimental medicine. We're trying to please people by approving things just because people are already taking them, which I think is very wrong to do. So going into the cost of Bari, what I would say is Bari without insurance, I think there are others who may correct me, especially Bogoma, it's about $2,000 to $3,000 for treatment. That's for treatment for, was it 30 tablets? Or 20 something, yeah. So it's about $2,000 to $3,000. It's far cheaper than tocilizumab.
Let's speak in CFA now.
So
well, can I say something?
Yes, please.
The good thing is, well, kind of the good and during the surge, the Delta surge what came out of the Delta surge in India that killed millions and millions of people was that Eli Lilly, the company that manufactures baricitinib, signed generic manufacturing with two big generic pharmaceutical companies in India to produce baricitinib at a heavily subsidized price. So right now, for 4 milligram doses for 30 tablets, which would be essentially, which could cover basically treatment for, that would be if you're giving 4 milligrams a day for 14 days, that would cover treatment for two patients. It's $47. That's the price from the Indian generic right now. So that would be the equivalent of about 20,000 CFA.
So for 10,000, we could treat a patient in Cameroon with baricitinib.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these generics are now available. I don't know whether they're available in Cameroon yet, but to the point of Kathy's point about the national guidelines in Cameroon, I had the opportunity to read some of the national guidelines, and I must say that I was a little bit disappointed by the fact that a lot of it is not keeping up to pace with the data and the evidence that is evolving. You know, when you still see things in the guidelines that have been excluded from the WHO guidelines because the evidence simply isn't there, and you're still seeing that reflected in our own national guidelines, I worry that even therapeutics that have efficacy like JAK inhibitors, which can be readily made available in our COVID treatment centers if the ministry sources out the generics from the companies making them in Asia, that some of those would not filter into our own national guidelines, and that some of our practitioners on the ground will not be educated on how to use these medications. And I think that is sad. The COVID literature has been evolving very rapidly, but my own view is when you set up a commission to make guidelines, you're basically assigning people on that commission to delve into the literature and to stay abreast with the developments. Even at my hospital within my institution, a guidelines panel was created. And ever so often we get updates based on the latest. What is latest? What has been adjusted? What has been changed in the guidelines? And I think we do ourselves a huge disservice when we continue to practice sentimental medicine and medicine based on anecdotes. The plural of anecdotes do not make data. And we really have to lose some of these bad habits and learn to develop our own data to show that these things that we are using work. I have nothing against traditional African medicine. And I do believe that we have antivirals and antibacterials in our own environment. But if we are to give traditional African medicine the respect and the place that it needs, we have to be disciplined in demonstrating that the therapies that we say work actually work by testing and evaluating them properly. You know, I was quite surprised to see that, you know, some of the traditional medications had been approved without data. I would love to see the data on this. And I'll be the first to advocate for them to be used if there is solid data backing it. And we really need to get better with this.
Great. And Bill Wingo.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Mono, for the very good presentation that I joined a little bit late, but I was able to appreciate some of the advances that we have actually recorded when it comes to COVID-19. I think COVID-19 has really challenged science tremendously to the extent that we have been doing a lot of guesswork. And particularly in the country, we can see the way medicines are being approved left and right. That just shows how difficult it has been to actually find a cure to this particular pandemic. And one thing that I appreciate is the multitude of clinical trials. And definitely they have shown the efficacy of certain medications that you have presented, but I don't know how far we've gone with trying to get to track data about the effectiveness of these medications. We talk about ivermectin. We have been doing campaigns, even within the COVID-19 pandemic, we had campaigns. I don't know if it is because of the disconnect between certain services in our Ministry of Health, or if it is just lack of interest. to try to find out what has been the impact of having such a campaign on the prevalence of COVID-19. But on the contrary, what we have noticed is that even after such a campaign, the number of cases of COVID-19 have been increasing. And that is quite disturbing when we are discussing about a medication that should be a source of hope. So I appreciate the efficacy of those medications, but I remain very worried about their effectiveness. I don't know what you have to say about the effectiveness of these medications that are being used presently. Is it really effective, or is the virus just following its natural course and we are just beating about the bush and trying things left and right? Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much, Wingo. And your question really has several sub questions embedded in them. So talking about I think it will be the place of you guys in the field, public health doctors in Cameroon, to follow up your campaigns that you've been doing in fight against, let's say, onchocerciasis, looking at areas with high burden onchocerciasis and comparing them with areas of low burden onchocerciasis, districts that are comparable, and trying to give us data and see if the ivermectin distribution has had an impact on COVID or not. And that is very good when we generate our own data, because that's going to help us, as you said from your observations, is that it didn't make a difference. But it will be good for you to try to give us this data, publish them, so that we can actually help move science ahead. So these are all things that even at our own local level, we can do them. Now, getting to the therapeutics that we have in this pandemic, what we can tell you for sure is that vaccination has been a tool that has shown its effectiveness, and it has been very efficacious, though right now we do have some data showing that maybe it's wearing out. But as I'm not an immunologist, because there is a caveat to that question, because your human body cannot make antibodies. I spoke to Brian about this, and keep making them. Like, you make 1,000, your blood is not going to flow as a hematologist. You make memory cells for that reason, because you're not just making antibodies and circulating them. Even if the titers are going down, this could be a natural cause, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're resistant, but it's a whole discussion what this means. But I think Israel did something different, where they measured the level of infectiousness in the community, which could be an indication that something is happening. And I also wanted the CDC, that has a lot of data, to tell us who these patients are. These people who are having breakthrough infections, who are they? Is it those who took what vaccine? Was it the Pfizer? Was it the Moderna? Is it as a result of giving it every 3 weeks? Is Moderna better because they gave it the 4th dose after 4 weeks? Was it better in the UK because they spaced it out? Are we dealing with the issue of the amount of RNA vaccine that was given initially, where Moderna was higher than Pfizer? I think Bogoma is going to be better talking about this. She's a virologist. So these are all things that are questions to answer. But getting into therapeutics, there were randomized clinical trials that were done, which compared, in this level, we're dealing with individuals, with a group of people who got therapeutics versus those who got placebo. And we saw that it was efficacious in preventing death among those who got sick, Wingo. So the drugs that we're talking about, especially dexamethasone, prevented death. But as we all know, and from the presentation I get, therapeutics...
Effectiveness. Yes. I think there's a difference between efficacy and effectiveness.
So that's when you come to, there's a difference, but the caveat, yes, Boguma, I want to say something, yeah.
I want to say something to that point that Wingo just raised. Yes, there is a difference between efficacy and effectiveness, and particularly pertaining to dexamethasone. They have evaluated the effectiveness of dexamethasone as an intervention against severe COVID-19 on the impact of overall reduction in mortality since it was rolled out in the UK. And it's estimated that after the recovery trials demonstrated its efficacy in the trials in reducing mortality by 20%, once it became implemented as part of the treatment for severe COVID-19 in the UK, it has led to the avoidance of an estimated 150,000 deaths in that country.
Yeah.
And there's similar studies that have been carried out here in the US and also in other countries in Europe. So community effectiveness of dexamethasone as an intervention for treating severe COVID has been assessed, and it is clear as night is from day. It works as a factor to reduce mortality.
Yeah. And also for the vaccine, if you go to my Facebook page, you would see the effectiveness of the vaccines interventions. I've put in about 4 publications, I think, for the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the J&J in the community level. So we do have data actually for vaccines, and we do have data for dexamethasone. So I think getting to, those are the 2 caveats. I think, Boguma, do you have anything to add to the questions here?
What I would add, and what I want to really emphasize for our communities back home, we already have talked a lot about the fact that we're really limited in some of the access to the therapeutics that have been shown to work against COVID-19. Vaccines work. And right now, Cameroon is in the 10 countries that have the lowest rates of vaccine uptake in sub-Saharan Africa, polling at about 0.5% of the population. Here currently, despite the case numbers that we have seen from the Delta surge, 90% of people who are landing in hospitalized with COVID-19 are people who are unvaccinated. The vaccines have been delivered to almost 5 billion people around the world. They're safe and they're effective. In our own environment, the single best thing anybody can do to prevent or to have an impact on COVID-19 is to get vaccinated. And I think that that should really be the message that public health experts on the ground should be pushing. In terms of the reduction in efficacy of the vaccines that we've been seeing, first of all, I'd like to start by saying that there's no vaccine that is 100% effective. Even when you talk about a vaccine that has very high levels of effectiveness, like the measles vaccine, which is estimated anywhere between 95 and 98%, there are still individuals who get vaccinated against measles and go on to develop measles, because no vaccine is 100% effective. We are starting to see breakthrough cases. Is this surprising? No, it is expected, because again, no vaccine is 100% effective. But what we must focus on is the fact that despite the increase in breakthrough infections and in mild disease, protection against severe disease has remained very stable. Even from the Israeli data, where they've been showing reductions in effectiveness, when you take that data and you adjust it for age, and you look at the effectiveness of the vaccine within age groups, the effectiveness against severe disease remains at about 80 to 90% for mRNA vaccines. And for AstraZeneca, J&J, and the other vaccines, it's anywhere between 80 and 90%. And that really should be the message that we should communicate to people. Because if this was an outbreak or a pandemic of a common cold that wasn't landing people in the hospital, the world would not have ground to a halt. This is an issue because the disease is severe enough to land a significant proportion of people in the hospital and result in deaths. So we must try to push up the vaccination numbers in our own communities up.
Yep, thank you very much. Elvis, you're muted. I think you're talking, but you're muted.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I wanted to call Irwana.
Yeah, Dr. Irwan.
Yeah, hi, hello. I hope, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's really a pleasure to meet you again. I'm very happy to meet, to see BK. It's been a long time, only on Facebook that, and sometimes on the CRTV, I saw her last time. It was really a pleasure. I really appreciate what she just said, especially on the fact that among the different therapeutics or the interventions that we have, vaccines are probably the best the most effective thing for us in our setting. And we have to push people to go and get vaccinated. I have one question and also a certain comment about the way it's being seen in Cameroon and the way we deal with that disease. Concerning my question, personally, I have taken my first shot of AstraZeneca, and now in the country, I'm due for the second dose, but it's not available in Douala, and I'm in Douala for now. And this week, I've been going through all the different vaccination posts, and I can't get the AstraZeneca shot. And I was like, can I take the Johnson & Johnson? I don't know. I wish you can give me an answer about that. And then my comment, in Cameroon, I always say the problem with the disease is the fact that it kills or it gives a serious disability. It kills, it's clear. Disability it's a wide range of disability. It can just give you a sick leave to maybe you can't wake up, you can't do what you have to do, you can be paralyzed, a stroke or something like that. The problem with the COVID in our setting is that we have a lot of problems. That's one is already known. And when you come with a new problem, the first question people ask, is it more than what we already have? Now, although by watching the TV in Europe and everything, those continuous information of a lot of people, thousands of people dying every day, I don't know if I would say fortunately or unfortunately, it didn't happen like that in Cameroon, at least in Cameroon, or in a lot of sub-Saharan African countries. So people tend to think that it's another thing for the white people. Really, that's what is in their mind. I don't know, me, I always work with guys, really primary healthcare. People have a different mind when it comes to COVID. And they always think, is it a worse than what we already have? That's what comes into their mind. Now, it's not only the patients that are thinking like that, also the doctors are thinking like that. And we have to acknowledge the fact that we have a lot of doctors in Cameroon. We don't have a lot of scientists. We have not been trained to be scientists. Evidence-based medicine, it is not really in our mindset. We have not been trained and been focused on it. That's where the problem is. When we have a problem like this one, that we have to do that job, we just realize that for many years, we have not been doing it, even for simple things. We have not been taking decisions based on data for simple things like water, sanitation, and these simple things like that. Now you are coming with a disease that is giving headache to the white people, that you think people in Cameroon will just start doing exactly the nice things are within. This is very difficult. We have done a lot of things on the sentimental ground, a lot of things, and that's what we are also doing. As BK said, it's really like myself, I was quite disappointed when I saw the recent guidelines, seeing that a lot of things that have already been, it's clear that some of those are not working, but it's still on it. And we are still working because one thing, maybe we don't have the means for now to get the appropriate drugs. And then what will you say to the patient? That actually all those drugs doesn't work, that they don't work? So what can you tell the patient who is in front of you, telling him that we know that the disease we know what we can give as treatment, but we don't have that treatment. So that is another problem. So we, in a certain sense, we need to be sentimental in that level, but it shouldn't be that the doctors doesn't know. It can take it maybe a sort of placebo to reassure the patient, but you will see that some doctors, they don't even know that those drugs, they don't work. The thing is, are we real scientists? Another thing that I would like to pour into the pavé dans la mare, as we said in French, is that when this issue of financing for the COVID came, I don't know if there was a budget line for the research in COVID at this time. We had a real opportunity at least to do a research on a disease that is there, a new disease. We have gone back to the same thing that we've done when HIV came 30 years ago. We are again doing, and we are waiting. It's like we are waiting for the disease to become so severe before we start taking the real steps. For now, this is a problem. We haven't done research. As we said today, for the simple things like the drugs that we want to say that we can cure, we have a disease, we have a treatment. like, I mean, all those drugs that are this, I don't want to say a particular drug, but all those drugs that our traditional guys have shown, they may be effective. But when you imagine that the scientists in the Ministry of Health cannot sit down and tell them that, okay, we have to do it very well. If it works, it will help everybody. Nothing, we'll go for sentimental. It's like telling people we go and pray, it's okay. So our problem is that we don't have the means. When we have at least some means, we don't use it very well. Then we end up being sentimental because it seems to be the only thing we can do. So I will not want you to be very severe on the doctors, but sometimes that's the only thing they can do. We have to be a little bit sentimental to reassure our patient that at least you have the disease, we are giving you something. Now, as this town hall is there, we have to explain to the other doctors that at least, even if you give something, at least I think a lot of vitamins are good placebos in this case, but at least the doctor should exactly know what disease is really effective, which one is efficacious, and yeah, and so on and so forth. So that's my intervention. Yeah.
So
Thank you so much, Ivan. It's really nice to hear from you. It's been years.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer the first part of your question where you said you've had one dose of AstraZeneca and you've not been able to find another dose. We now have emerging data on mixing of COVID vaccines. Heterologous prime boosting is something that is well known and well described in vaccinology. And by that, what I mean by heterologous prime boosting is maybe getting a first dose of a vaccine from one platform and then getting a second dose of a vaccine for that same pathogen from a different platform. When it comes to COVID-19 vaccines, the bulk of the data on using two different vaccines is mainly on mixing mRNA vaccines and AstraZeneca. So people who got a first dose of mRNA and then got their second dose with AstraZeneca and vice versa. And the data shows that the vaccine continues to work. It's as efficacious, and actually with heterologous prime boosting, the immune response in terms of the antibody levels tend to be higher. Now, unfortunately, we have not had data on heterologous prime boosting with other combinations. In your case, AstraZeneca followed by J&J or AstraZeneca followed by Sinopharm or any of those. From my view, as someone who is a virologist and an infectious diseases doctor, there is no evidence to show that it will not work or anything that makes me think that it will be contraindicated. And I have actually had patients who've come in from other countries who had a first dose of Sinopharm, maybe in Asia, and then they came into the US, and then we gave them the mRNA vaccine. I had patients who came in from other countries where they had a dose of AstraZeneca, and then they got their second dose of mRNA. I tend, if you're going to do heterologous prime boosting, I would be a little bit hesitant to do AstraZeneca followed by J&J. And the reason is this: both of those vaccines are the platform that have a very, very, very small risk of thrombosis as an adverse effect of the vaccination. So I would want to see those two tested in heterologous prime boost before I feel comfortable in recommending them. So if you have access to Sinopharm, I would say get your second dose with an inactivated vaccine. Get the Sinopharm. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then in terms of kind of coming back to the comments that you have made, yes, in certain environments, it's very difficult to just diagnose someone with a disease and tell them to go home, because in our environment, we have the concept in our heads that when I have an illness, I have to have a treatment. We like drugs. And I don't think that that is something that's unique to Cameroon. Actually, in parts of Asia, you're not able to do placebo-controlled trials because a placebo is not acceptable to the people in that environment. And for those trials, they tend to use drugs that serve as placebo but are not harmful. So you mentioned giving people vitamin supplementation. That's not something I am against, so far as the person prescribing it makes it very clear to the patient that this is maybe just something that would help you while you recover from this disease to supplement your vitamins so that your immune system can be optimized to help it fight the infection. Where I take issue is for practitioners prescribing those medications and pretending that those medications are treatments for COVID. They are not. And I think it serves us better to take the time to educate ourselves. Every single therapeutic trial that has been shown to be effective for COVID is available and open to be read online. You don't even need to have a subscription to the journal to be able to read these papers. But as you said, we train doctors, we don't train scientists. And we're not in the habit of reading and staying updated in our knowledge. And that's really something that as physicians, as a health community, we have to create and reinforce those habits. And one of the things that the Cameroon Town Hall does is bring people to actually talk about evidence-based medicine and to use some of those practices in our practice. Now, the third and final thing I'm going to comment about is you did mention that people have not taken up vaccination seriously in our environment because they don't see COVID-19 as a huge problem in the African context. I think that this has to do a lot with the way in which public health messaging has happened on the continent. I remember a time in the early days of HIV where people would not take antiretroviral drugs. They called it musong, they called it all sorts of things, and there was strong resistance against antiretroviral treatment. Unfortunately, that led to 10 million plus deaths happening in sub-Saharan Africa. We don't have to see dead bodies in the streets from COVID for COVID to be a serious problem in our communities, because there are indirect deaths that we are not counting that are happening as a result of the pandemic. Because we have COVID-19 circulating, it has disrupted TB control, it has disrupted malaria control, it has disrupted control of HIV and other infectious diseases conditions that are important burdens of disease and killers within our community. So even if the excess deaths from COVID-19 in the African setting are not as bad as you have in the US, as you have in Europe, because of the youthfulness of our populations, because of the lower mobility within our communities, it is not negligible because COVID is here to stay. And cumulatively over time, I would not be surprised if the deaths, both directly from COVID and indirectly from COVID on the African continent, tend to be higher overall than in the rest of the world if we don't accept vaccination and get control of the pandemic in our own settings. That has played out with other diseases before. Malaria used to circulate in Europe and in the Americas, but it has been eradicated in these settings and today continues to kill 300,000 people a year on the African continent. HIV has been largely controlled in a lot of the parts of the world. The highest burden of HIV remains in sub-Saharan Africa. When all of this is said and done, if we don't step up our game and take and accept vaccination and get immunity in our communities, COVID will be a problem that is controlled elsewhere and will be something that continues to cause excess mortality in our communities. So we have to start learning from the lessons of the past and really start doing the things that track with science to improve the health of our communities. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bogoma. You said it all. We need to, Erwan was more of a lot of statements that he made, which were frank and true statements. We need to also educate our healthcare workers in trying to digest evidence-based medicine, trying to use opportunities like this to run research. And I would say vaccinate, educate, do use all the healthcare strategies that we have to get people to get this vaccine. So everyone here should do the same. all the DMOs who are here, everyone should try as much. Vaccines do work. And I'll go back to a statement I say all the time. If you go back 100 years, 200 years, and look at all the interventions that we have done on Earth that have reduced mortality or improved life expectancy, there are three things that stand out. Hygiene and sanitation all have to do with infectious disease. The discovery of antibiotics, and the third one is vaccination and smoking cessation. Those are the four things. Cutting people in the cardiac card, doing all these crazy things that we do have not shown in huge studies to improve human life expectancy. Vaccines work, and they do work very well. So
thank you.
We should get people vaccinated.
Thank you very much, Mono and BK Tanji, for your intervention. And I really want to thank Iran for that very great comment. It has opened, a window for us to get more information from our speakers. So we call on Joyce. I see your hand up before we get to Brian and then Oja. And those will be our last questions for the session.
Thank you for having me, and I want to thank Dr. Muno and Dr. Titanji for giving us up-to-date information on COVID-19 at a very critical time in the pandemic. My question is regarding the place of concomitant pulmonary infections with fungal pathogens in patients with severe COVID. And what is the place of empirically treating patients with antifungals like micafungin in patients with severe COVID? And the second question, what are the range of post-COVID syndromes now currently during the pandemic? I haven't seen too many, but I'd like to know what is the variety of post-COVID syndromes which have been maybe given ICD classifications. Thank you very much.
To answer your first question, that's very straightforward. There's no role for micafungin empirically in patients with severe COVID. Micafungin is an antifungal drug that primarily has activity against yeast, notably different species of Candida. Candida infections, Candida does not cause pulmonary infections, that's for one. If you do have patients who have COVID-19, have severe COVID-19, and you think that they have superinfection with either fungal agents or bacterial, I advocate only to treat if you have demonstrated that they are actively infected with these things. So you have culture proven infections, there's no place for empiricism in that setting. So if someone has candidemia, a bloodstream infection with candida, by all means treat them with micafungin, but I will not give it empirically just because I anticipate that they might get a fungal infection, because you're just driving drug resistance and there's no evidence to show that it improves upon their disease course or decreases mortality. In terms of the post-COVID syndromes, one of the biggest challenges that we have faced with the post-COVID syndromes, and I'm speaking specifically about long COVID, is that while it's now been well characterized that there are patients who recover from COVID-19 and have a broad range of symptoms that persist well beyond their recovery time, we don't yet have a consensus on the diagnostic criteria for long COVID. And I think that that is where it makes it very hard to actually have ICD codes for the condition, because in certain people, it might manifest as just chronic shortness of breath, whereas in others, it manifests by extreme exhaustion, neurological symptoms, rheumatologic symptoms, etc. So the spectrum of disease is very, very broad and not yet fully understood in terms of its pathogenesis, not yet fully understood in terms of what actually makes the case definition for long COVID, and also not understood in terms of the interventions that have any benefit or not in actually addressing this condition. So a lot that we still need to learn and understand about post-COVID, but we do know that about 5 to 10% of people who recover from a bout of COVID, be it mild disease or severe disease, will have some form of post-COVID syndrome that so far appears to be long-term.
Thank you very much. Bogumar has answered that question. And it looks like, I don't know if you can confirm, vaccines do help. Some studies are showing that.
Yes, actually, there's a large study, I think, that got published in the Lancet that has actually looked at the rates of long COVID symptoms in patients who developed breakthrough infections after being vaccinated, and compared to those who got long COVID from natural infection. And the rates of long COVID are a lot lower in patients who have been vaccinated than in those who have not been. So another reason why vaccination should be advocated, because even if you say I'm young, I'm healthy, I have no underlying condition, so if I have COVID-19, it's going to be mild, you could very well develop post-COVID syndrome, and getting vaccinated reduces your chances of developing that. So it's important to be vaccinated for those reasons. And just tying that to a question that I saw in the chat, which mentioned whether people who've had COVID before should get vaccinated. The simple answer to that is yes, because we also now have evidence that vaccine-induced immunity is more durable and also has more breadth and depth in terms of its ability to provide immunity against not only the wild type strain of the virus, but to provide immunity against the variants of concern that are emerging. So in my patients who have had COVID, I still advocate for them to get vaccinated, because you are actually improving the quality of the immunity that you have. You're boosting your natural immunity with a vaccine dose, and it gives it more breadth and depth.
Okay. Yep, I'm just showing this here. That's what Dr. Bogumar is talking about. So I think she answered all the questions perfectly. I have nothing to add. So let's go to the next one, Elvis.
Yes, Brian.
Yeah, Bogumar, it's such a pleasure to always have you. Thanks a lot. I really wanted to get your thoughts on this discussion around booster shots or third doses of the COVID vaccine in the context of the vaccine inequity that we're seeing across the world. And if you're considering people who are immunocompromised or receiving any kind of immunosuppressive therapy, if there are people who are receiving medications that inhibit, like rituximab, that inhibit CD10, CD20, and inhibit B cells, would you still recommend that they receive third doses? I'm just saying, if you're going to consider giving that to immunocompromised people. The second question, I'm really curious to know, have you seen any increase in the incidence of MIS-C in children? We see more children coming up with this multi-inflammatory syndrome in children with the Delta surge. Are you aware of any monoclonal trial that's looking into children below the age of 12? Are you aware of any trials in those particular groups? And finally, I'm just curious about the deployment of monoclonal antibodies. It seems to be a very effective therapy here in the United States and really drastically reducing hospitalizations and deaths. Any plans, are you aware of any plans to deploy monoclonal therapy in Africa?
Okay. Hi, Brian. Thanks for your question. So starting with your first question, when it comes to booster doses for the vaccines, are booster doses needed? The answer is yes, for certain people. What do we know about the immunity conferred by vaccines so far? We know that over time in the elderly, people over 60, from cohorts both in Israel and in Europe, notably Scotland, England, and other European countries, that individuals who are older tend to have a more rapid decline in their antibody levels, post vaccination. And it's not just for COVID-19 vaccines. This is a well-described phenomenon even with other vaccines, because as we age, our immune systems also age. So generally people above 60, 65, they tend to have immunosenescence. Their B cells are less responsive, so they tend to have quicker decline of antibody levels post-vaccination. So there is evidence that in these particular subgroups of the population, there will be benefit in giving them a third booster dose to try to increase those antibody levels. In people who are immunocompromised, that's a very heterogeneous group, because there are different things that can confer immunocompromise, be it a disease. If you have HIV infection and you have AIDS and you have no T cells, you are severely immunocompromised, but your type of immunocompromise is not the same as someone who is taking high dose steroids for an autoimmune disease, or someone who is taking rituximab to treat another autoimmune condition. So it's a very broad spectrum and broad category of individuals, but there is also some evidence to suggest that in individuals who are immunocompromised, they might benefit from getting that third dose to help them boost their immune response. You specifically mentioned individuals who are on rituximab. Rituximab is an anti-CD20, so essentially blocks your B cells. And if you don't have B cells, you can't make antibodies. What we don't know and what is not yet well characterized is what are the T cell responses in these individuals who don't have antibody responses. Because although we can measure T cell responses, the tests that measure T cell responses are a bit more challenging to do on a wide scale, as safe compared to an antibody test that can be very rapidly done with an ELISA or lateral or another type of assay, maybe a lateral flow assay or whatever. It's a lot harder to do large scale T cell immunity testing compared to doing antibody testing. So in these individuals, we don't know for sure whether giving them a third booster dose necessarily helps. We also don't know for sure that their immunity level is 0, because we have not necessarily quantified their their T cell immune responses. So because when you're making guidelines, you have to sort of make these guidelines so that they're easy to follow. When you go and you look at the categories of people who meet the criteria for immunocompromise and need of boosters, they have just made it quite broad. So you would find that even some individuals who are receiving some of these B cell therapies are included in that category. But we don't know whether giving them that third dose necessarily adds to anything or not. It's just that they do meet the criteria of giving them the chance to try to mount a response that may be protective for them. The second part of your question was in terms of MISC syndromes in children. In the US, we have seen a surge in cases in children from Delta, because I think one of the things that's driving that is that there were lots of lockdowns last year. Children were at home and schooled from home remotely. So they were not in school and they didn't have the same exposures that they have now that they have returned to in-person schooling. And once schools reopened, it became very clear that children are able to get infected. Children are able to transmit the virus quite efficiently from themselves to other children or to adults, and that children get quite sick from it. Granted, the levels of severe disease in children are much lower than in adults, but if you have all of a sudden, instead of 100 infections in children, and you increase that to 1 million infections in children, even if only 1% of children go on to develop severe disease, that 1% becomes more significant if you're getting more infections in that population. So yes, we are seeing more inflammatory syndromes characterized in children, because it is a reflection of the increase in number of cases of children getting infected with COVID. Now, in terms of monoclonal antibody clinical trials for children under the age of 12. I am not aware of any that are currently recruiting, but I also, full disclosure, I'm not a pediatrician and I've not been staying on top of the pediatric literature to the same degree as I stay on top of the literature with adults. But I hope that these studies are being done, because there is clearly a need to address severe COVID in children. And in parts of the South in the US, as you know, pediatric ICUs are actually full with children who have some manifestation of severe COVID.
Just to add, for our patients who are on rituximab, those who are oncology patients, we're advocating for them to get a third dose. As Dr. Titanji said, the reason being we don't know exactly how the T cell side of the cellular immune response actually works, and no one is really able to quantify it. So we actually advocated for them to get a third dose. Elvis, over to you.
Yes. Thank you all for your questions. I think, Brian, are we coming to the end?
Ojong had the last question.
Ojong will speak in the parking lot, he just indicated. So, Brian, you want to close the session?
Yeah, I just wanted to thanks a lot for the response, and thanks a lot for everyone.
Use my question in the chat.
Oh,
yeah.
Raisa had a question in the chat. Raisa, are you comfortable with the clarification given?
She asked a question, Raisa asked a question about the use of procalcitonin. And I think that, discussing procalcitonin use to diagnose infections is a town hall on its own. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, Raisa. We are going to make sure we have a session to discuss complex topics like that so that we can all learn. Thank you so much for your question.
We'll talk about that in the parking lot.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the parking lot. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us today. Really thrilled. Excellent discussion, excellent panel. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So we're going to close the session right now, but we will have the parking lot. So everyone, you can stay back and join us in the parking lot.
So we have the parking lot coming on, and so feel free to.
Where's the cake, Muna? Where's the cake?
No cake. I got all the wishes, no cake. So that's.
Where is the fufu?
Happy birthday again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. See you next week.
Okay, so